Hello, hello, hello. Sarah Olivieri here. And today I want to talk to you about strategic planning for nonprofits that works in the 21st century. In case you don't know me, I am a former executive director. I've been a board member. I've been a founder, and it is my pleasure to have been a trainer, coach, and consultant for the last many years. I have over 2 decades of experience in leading and training nonprofit organizations. And today I want to talk about strategic planning, which is something near and dear to my heart, but the way I approach it is quite different than the traditional model, which I think is really quite broken at this point. So stick with me for the next few minutes, and I'm going to give you my top tips about strategic planning that really works and some do's and don'ts. But first, let's talk about why is strategic planning so important? Well, if you don't have a plan, a strategic plan is really a set of goals about where you want to go and a set of tactics that are the steps that you're going to take, the actions you're going to take to achieve those goals. So if you envision a map, your strategic plan is simply where on that map you want to go and which are the routes that are going to get you there. So that is why strategic planning is so important, is because if you don't know where you're going, it's hard to get other people excited about taking that journey with you. And if you don't actually sit down and write out your tactics, ideas about actions that you're going to take to get there, there's a really good chance you might not get there at all. So that is why having a plan is so important, so you know where you're going, and that the rest of the people on your team, in your volunteers, with your donors, with your board, can all join on that journey with you. So what are some key things that I think you should be doing differently from the traditional model? The traditional model is every 3 to 5 years, it used to be 10 years, the board of directors comes together, usually with a strategic planning facilitator. They revisit the mission and their vision, and they gather all this information. They interview stakeholders and staff and community members, and ultimately they make a decision about where they want to be in the next 5 years, 10 years, 3 years. And then they lay out the tactics. Usually it's a little lighter there. And then the plan is turned over to the staff to figure out the details about how to make this happen. And there's a few issues with that approach. One is a lot of the time is taking up planning to plan, right? When you plan so infrequently, nobody remembers how to do it. So you have to have a guide come in and you have to plan. And that can take weeks or a month just to be ready to start the planning process. So that's one thing that's broken about that old system. Another thing that is really a challenge is in that whole process, the board members are told they should be deciding, they should be leading strategy and deciding on the strategy, but they're not actually in a great place to be deciding what the goals should be about where to go. And they're certainly not in a good place around understanding which tactics, which actions are most likely to get them there, because they're part-time volunteers. They're not deep day-to-day tackling this mission that their nonprofit is on and understanding all the challenges and intricacies that are involved in achieving that mission or potentially achieving that mission. So we really ask a board to do something that they're not the best people in the room to be asking to do it. And then third is this process is so lengthy that so many organizations, by the time their strategic plan is ready, it's almost already out of date. And it's so involved. If you realize you need to change your plan, it's really hard to do it. And then what happens? Well, that plan just goes off back on the shelf, and we'll be like, oh, well, we'll get to that later. And it feels like some sort of extra layer that's placed on top of all the other work that the nonprofit is doing day to day. So, what are my fixes, you want to know? Well, in a nutshell, first of all, the leading of the planning should be done by the executive director and the leadership staff, and they should bring in whoever else is needed to inform the planning. And as a matter of routine, all the staff should be providing information on a weekly basis about what's going well and what's not working in the organization. And part of regular operating your nonprofit communications department, which really should have the skills of marketing, which are not just communicating but are researching, should be part of their job to be researching what is the community that we serve need? Are our services meeting those needs? Are there new unmet needs developing? Are we reaching the maximum amount of people we could be reaching with our services? This is research that's often only done every now and then when an organization does strategic planning, but this is a critical function. It's a critical practice of marketing and something that should be done as par for a course of running programs and making sure that you have the right programs in place and that your programs are being run as well as they possibly could be. So put the planning process in the staff's hands and let the staff leadership decide, and the board can confirm that the plan makes sense, but they don't need to create the plan. They don't need to generate the goals. They don't need to even decide which goals to work on. They just need to look at it and say, yes, these goals do make sense according to our mission. And these tactics, these actions we're going to take logically make sense on a surface level, at least based on what we've been presented by our staff, make sense for achieving those goals, right? This is a quality control check, not the deciding, driving group. Okay, so that's one. Move the strategic planning from board leads it to staff leads it. Okay, number two, you need to be planning much more frequently. In fact, you need to have an iterative approach to planning. In the impact method, which I teach my clients, we do strategic planning every 2 months. I do it too. I just did mine yesterday. It only took a couple hours. And what that does is allows us to really create a plan that the goals can go as far into the future as they need to be. They can be as short term or as long term as they make sense for those goals. And we have the ability to then change our plan readily. So every 2 months, we're checking, we're refining, improving, tweaking. Sometimes it's big changes, sometimes it's small changes, but it's now this living document. And we're incorporating everything that we're doing into our organization and driving our strategic plan with all of our actions. It's no longer the surface level thing. It's easy to adapt and change. And we get to eliminate the planning to plan process, because when you plan every 2 months, guess what? You learn how to plan and you no longer have to plan to plan. The planning to plan is we create the recurring event in our calendar, and then our planning to plan is done indefinitely. And we use a standard standing agenda for the planning process in the impact method. So put it in the staff hands and do it more frequently. And the last thing I want to add today is some people believe that strategic plans should only include goals directly tied to like the outcome of the mission, right? Programmatic type goals. And they don't want to include things like, how are we going to raise more money? How are we going to increase our staff? Capacity building type goals. And I just think that is a huge mistake, because the capacity, that fuel, the money, and the people who run our organization is totally essential to everything that we want to accomplish. And so for many startup organizations, many organizations who've been struggling financially or are under-resourced, they need primarily capacity goals, because I like to say it doesn't matter where in the great ocean you are going if you're floating on a little tiki raft, right? First, you need to level up your ship, and then you can set an incredible goal for yourself. That's all I have for you today. But if you would like to dive deeper on topics with me and be in the room as I help you create your strategic plan, I'd love you to consider applying to be part of the Thrive program, where we will do just that. Or if you'd simply like tips like this delivered in writing to your email and announcements about upcoming free and low-cost trainings, go to pivotground.com/sign up, and I'll be happy to send you those on a mostly weekly basis. Or if you are interested in the Thrive program, you can apply by going to pivotground.com/application. And I will see you next